exercise from the point of view of the professional development industry is to keep people tied up and addicted to feel-good factors, not to make their lives better. What do you think of that? Put your own comment below if you so desire. I think it's slightly controversial, but I think it's true all the same. And as I've stated previously, I don't think people have sat down with a drawing board and worked this out. However, there's many a motivational speaker out there who has managed to get rich and doesn't mind getting rich on the fact that some people are hopelessly addicted to personal development and motivation. But to return to the topic of the third dog and learned helplessness, the conditioning that happens when somebody learns to be helpless is both behavioural and neurological. The truth of the matter is that when somebody learns to be helpless, they are rewiring their brains in certain ways. And people who are hooked on dopamine spikes and hooked on the spikes that motivation creates can become trapped in a feedback loop. They can also be trapped in an escalating situation whereby they're going to need more and more, quotes, personal development and more motivation to feed the need for dopamine in their minds. This becomes a form of learned helplessness, because without the dopamine fix and without the guru and without the access to the personal development materials, they feel like they can't escape the compound. What they learn to do, in fact, is to customize their own emotional pain. Even on the subject of personal autonomy, one could argue that somebody who's hooked on the personal growth industry find themselves in a situation of imagined hope, followed by quick release and stimulus, followed by disappointment, followed by a vacuum. And the only way they can fill the vacuum is to engage again in imagined hope, also known as motivation. I'd argue that this is very similar to other addictive cycles, whereby the anticipation of the thing that causes pleasure, the exposure to the thing that causes pleasure, the depression that follows, and the vacuum that follows is something that the personal development industry is very willing to exploit. Have you noticed their attachment to the so-called big ticket offer? The big ticket offer is one whereby somebody might be encouraged to take out a loan in order to feed the monkey on their back, to get bigger and bigger, more impressive and noteworthy motivation dopamine spikes. It's another way of experiencing learned helplessness in which positive outcomes were never the aim of the exercise. What's happened is that perversely, the aim of the exercise is to keep the dopamine factory running. So far, I've suggested that the personal growth, personal development industry has managed to find multiple ways to encourage people to customize their own experience of pain. And of course, the more pain that a person can experience, the more vulnerable and more susceptible they are going to be to anyone who can offer a fix. And incidentally, the expectation of a fix, the dopamine spike that comes from that, the empty promise of motivation is going to become the thing that they need, as opposed to the positive outcomes that are often promised, but often not delivered. So learned helplessness, by very definition, is learned. I'm not suggesting that it has been directly taught to people by personal growth industry. But I would suggest that people who have learned to be helpless have gone through some very complex and interesting circumstances in order to become so hooked and addicted to false hope, false motivation. And of course this ultimately leads to them parting with quite large amounts of cash in order to feed their need. And I know perhaps I'm being unfair to people who are in the personal growth industry, but have you noticed there is a hierarchy of grievance backstory operating for many people? Many people seem to be only qualified to offer help and personal growth to their market if they have an astoundingly depressing backstory, often relating to poverty, addiction, loss, all sorts of circumstances which many people find very difficult to relate to. However, if you do find it possible to relate to some of these stories, then the probability is that you're going to be very vulnerable, susceptible, and open to the idea of buying their products so that you too can rise yourself above the total loss that they found themselves in. So I'd like to suggest that there's a heady cocktail of past trauma and past unanswered needs and perceived inadequacies which many of the coaches can capitalize on and exploit. As well as that, they feel that they can qualify the products that they are marketing because they are walking the talk or because they are providing something which has been won from hard experience. And again, I'm not going to dispute that this can be true in many cases, but let's look at the facts a little bit more forensically and examine the case, and you can come to your own conclusion about whether I am speaking truth to power, whether I'm being paranoid, or whether I'm just making stuff up.